All right. Well, I'll kick us off then, now that we're recording. Thanks everyone for joining us today for Career on Conversations. My name is Jeremy Latriano, and I'm joined today by Bruce Becker, who I'm very excited to speak with about his professional background and his wisdom to the emerging professionals community here at Build Green CT. Just a brief intro to Build Green CT. Our mission: accelerate the just and sustainable transformation of the built environment in Connecticut through education, advocacy, and community building. We'd love to welcome you all as members, as an emerging professional, which is the community that I am chair of. You get a discounted annual membership for $45. It's even less for students. This membership gets access to complimentary or discounted admission to Build Green CT events and educational offerings, including opportunities for professional development, education, and advancement, as well as opportunities to connect with industry and thought leaders throughout the state. If you go back and watch some of our career conversations that we've had already with some of the Build Green CT members, I think you'll find that it is a really strong community. And for those that are interested in breaking into sustainability in the built environment, it's a great place to start. A couple of housekeeping things. We are looking forward to our Green Building Impact Awards celebration on May 20th. Early bird tickets are still available through March 31st. So running out of time there, but still a few days to take care of those. This event will consist of an evening of food and drinks at the Glastonbury Boathouse in Glastonbury. And then our next career conversations will be Thursday, April 30th at 5 p.m. Looking forward to welcoming Maureen Molly, the Managing Director of Sustainable Building Services at Stephen Winter Associates. Um, that should be another fun one. Before we get into the interview with Bruce, I'd just like to talk a little bit about briefly about my career path, just to kind of give some context for the spirit of this digital event. I graduated from Penn State with a degree in energy business and finance. I kind of realized shortly after that I was really interested in sustainable design and construction. Spent some time as a superintendent and then jumped around with a couple part-time jobs before going back to school to get a degree in sustainability and urban environment from City College. I took an internship at 475 High Performance Building Supply during my first semester in that program and came on full-time the following semester. Been there for 8 years, most of that time as a product consultant. I also spent some time teaching at City College, one of the same classes that drew me to 475 originally. That's low energy buildings and high performance architecture alongside Alan Barlas. And I'm very excited to now be the chair of the emerging professionals community at Build Green CT. And as such, I'd like to welcome Bruce. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Jeremy. Thank you for including me. Are those high performance skylights behind you?
Those are digital high performance skylights. Yes, I like to think so, at least.
Very good.
Um,
Just
Much
glad that you're
preferable to
well.
my actual background right now.
Okay.
A little bit of background on Bruce. He is the president of Becker and Becker, an integrated sustainable architecture and development firm in Westport, Connecticut. Bruce is known for designing buildings that have a transformative social and environmental value. His work includes many monumental rehabilitation projects throughout the state of Connecticut. Most recently, and maybe most famously in this community, the rehabilitation of the iconic Pirelli building in New Haven, which is now the Passive House certified Hotel Marcel. We'll be hosting the Passive House Network PHN conference later this year. Really looking forward to that event. It's a gorgeous project. Uh, a variety of other accolades here that I won't get into too much, but I'm excited to maybe talk a little bit more about our interview. And yeah, I'll kick it off. I know you founded Becker and Becker Associates some time ago, 1988, according to your LinkedIn.
Well, I should mention that I'm not the founder. I sort of resurrected it. It was
Okay.
the company was started by my dad, who was an industrial designer, and his brother back in 1950. And then when I was in architecture school, he closed the firm down, and I after I graduated from graduate school, I went to work in San Francisco for 3 years, and then I came back and resurrected as an architecture and development firm. So I can't claim to be a founder, but I've been running it and sort of reestablished its direction, uh, back in 1988, actually.
Yeah, totally. Wow. That's an important distinction. Thank you for correcting me
Mhm.
there. Yeah, 1988, that's quite some time. I'm curious, maybe we could start off. You could tell us a little bit about how the firm has evolved over the years and how your role has changed over time.
Yeah, no, I feel lucky to be able to sort of steer the firm in the directions that are most interesting to me. And every decade, we've had almost an entirely different kind of company and firm in practice, um, and so that and it's sort of not been a conventional one. Um, to go back, I was a liberal arts major. I studied American Studies and Fine Arts um, up at Amherst College, and then I wasn't quite sure. I was always interested in design and the built environment, and I worked for a planning firm in Boston right after for a year after I graduated, and worked on streetscape plans and signage programs, and for this small nonprofit planning firm called Vision Inc. that sort of survived on grants. And I noticed when I was there that they wrote a lot of interesting plans, but there was a bookshelf full of them, and when I asked, it didn't seem like too many of them got implemented. They were really better at getting the grant and writing the plan, but it was more theoretical. Some of the stuff was useful because cities would build on it, but I got developed this conviction uh, in that experience, but also in being the son of designers. My mom was a furniture designer, and my dad was an industrial designer. They were always working around the clock to satisfy their clients, and um, at the client's beck and call, and sometimes having to compromise on what they really thought the right thing was. So I had been fascinated with the idea of an architect developer, and had read about that, about John Portman, who at the time was doing these interesting hotels. And uh, so then when I was in graduate school, I got an MBA as well as my master in architecture, thinking that that would maybe give me the freedom down the road to be uh, sort of my own client, and have the kind of control and freedom that architects have when they design their own house and their own, say, their mother's house. There's a great uh, body of work of architects' homes for their parents. When you're designing your own house or for your family, you're able to take control of more decisions than if you're having to respond to some independent client. As good as and it sort of depends on the quality of projects. That they say often you have to have a great client to have a great project. And so I didn't graduate from school with clients, so I had to figure out how I was going to orchestrate that. So that was my long-term plan. When I did spend 3 years in San Francisco working for Prudential's real estate arm. They have a big institutional real estate development arm. At least they did back then, and it was amazing graduating from an MBA. I almost went to work for Philip Johnson. I had actually done my internship with Edward Litterby Barnes, which I really loved that office. But then I was interested in other firms and other places. I was also interested in working for the Rouse Company. So I remember graduating from graduate school, I had 3 offers. I had an offer from Philip Johnson's office, from the Rouse Company down working on a festival marketplace down in Jacksonville, Florida, and then one from Prudential's working in an office in Embarcadero Center. And I wanted to I was impressed with San Francisco. My brothers were out in that area, and they were going to give me this beautiful office in Embarcadero Center looking out at the Golden Gate Bridge. So I said, I got to try this, even though I was really interested in more of a design role. But I also figured I could learn about how larger clients make decisions. And so while I had to give up being a designer for that period, I was on teams that would select architects for these large buildings. It was a pretty bureaucratic job. I wasn't really well suited to it. I was always filling out reports and, um, having to do spreadsheets and stuff like that, which was fine. But as time went on, I guess for also the other thing about that time was it was just a lot of fun to be in San Francisco in your early 20s, and had friends out there and doing skiing and biking, and it was not so much about the work, but it was a opportunity to um, hang out with uh, friends and have fun and learn a little bit about that. But then after doing that for 3 years, I figured I sort of had to get serious. My dad was still around, although he'd retired, and I figured if I went back reestablish the firm. He could be a mentor for me. I could sort of chart my own course. I'm not sure I would have wanted to ever work for my dad because I wanted to do my own thing. But um, he was a helpful mentor to me. And the first projects I did were volunteer. I worked for New York Cares, um, helping with some, these distressed buildings in the Bronx, sort of fixing them up with the families that were going to occupy them, and with some of the nonprofits that helped with that. And I offered to play the role of architect and development consultant for some of those. Eventually, um, I guess I had, thinking back at this, I had a friend who wanted an addition to his house up in Salisbury, Connecticut, and that pool house. So I had some friends that I did small little projects for. But then I was really interested in affordable housing. So I actually formed two different nonprofit organizations, one Common Ground, which redeveloped the Times Square Hotel into supportive housing, and then a project called Under One Roof, where we formed a nonprofit to acquire an empty school building in Norwalk, Connecticut, and turn it into affordable senior housing and childcare. And I was able to sort of, at the same time, I was also like doing some house projects, but I wasn't ever really that confident about my ability to market myself to do big traditional commissions, or at least it seemed like it was a lot of work, and I'd rather just sort of focus on getting the projects done. So I ended up getting on the boards of some nonprofits. I was on the board of the Harlem School of the Arts at a really critical time, and ended up being the board chair there, and meeting a bunch of people who were on the board, who gained confidence in me and then invested in some of my projects. It's funny, all the volunteer work I did, I got more out of it than the organizations I was working for. Not that I did that intentionally, but I was able to do stuff that was useful and develop skills and develop relationships, which then helped me in other ways as well. Yeah. So, and just to try to be a little more succinct about my career, so I did a lot of affordable housing. Then I got work with Avalon Bay Communities doing for-profit multifamily housing projects, some of which were 100, 200, 300 units. And I learned a lot about rental housing and what made that successful from a development perspective. But that, over time was less interesting, and I really wanted to have more control. So then I started to be my own developer, initially with partnering with real estate pension funds, and then and also using HUD financing and stuff. Some of the projects we've done in Connecticut here are redeveloping the Hartford National Bank, more recently known as the Bank of America Tower in Hartford, and then also building 360 State Street in New Haven, and then, as you mentioned, the hotel. And we also do have some sort of conventional client relationships. We were able to help the Carey Institute, which is a environmental research organization up in Millbrook, New York, remake their facilities to be environmentally sustainable and in line with their values. So I sort of hopped around different things, doing different things, which is not that different. There was a time when my dad was sort of the guy if you ended a museum shop, whether it was for the Met or for MoMA or for the Dallas Museum or the Smithsonian, he was sort of his firm was the one you went to for getting fixtures for museum shops. And so, and then at a different time before that, he was writing programs for municipal and corporate buildings. He wrote the program for the Boston City Hall competition. And I guess one thing I've gravitated towards is finding something that I could know as well as anyone and develop an expertise in that. I sort of learned that from my dad. And it wasn't so much what that expertise was, but just sort of developing an expertise so that you could be, the person that could do that. And then I always had to figure out, well, what is that for me? And the hotel, I realized I had recently redeveloped a brutalist, mid-century modern brutalist building in Hartford, and this Pirelli building was sitting there, and didn't seem like anyone else knew how to redevelop a brutalist building for a new use. So I spent a couple years figuring out how to do that, and that's what that came out of. So that's sort of a random answer to your question, but I've sort of skipped around with my
No
career.
worries. That's great. A lot of great stuff in there. Thank you. Yeah, I want to circle back to some of the early career and educational experiences that you mentioned. Your early volunteer work in the Bronx, also your Bachelor of Arts degree in American Studies and Fine Arts from Amherst College. I could definitely, in my mind, make a connection from experiences like that and the urban renewal and historic rehabilitation work that your firm is maybe really known for. I'm curious, was that passion for urban renewal drawn from those early experiences, or when did
Yeah,
that become important to you, and what were your inspirations there?
yeah. Well, I guess I've just always been curious about the reasons that buildings and cities are the way they are. My undergraduate thesis was on the grid and the American landscape, both in city planning and then in three dimensions in the skyscraper, and did a lot of reading about that. And then sort of fascinated with the New Haven grid and the Manhattan grid. Um, so I'm a classic ADHD person in that uh, um, I'm always sort of looking at the big picture, trying and easily distracted and going down rabbit holes. But I often find that being at the intersection between different disciplines creates opportunities that other people don't have. If you're all you're doing is like designing people's houses, that can be a great pursuit, but you're not necessarily connecting to as many social issues. Um, if it's sort of high-end residential houses, or if you're, uh, if you're interested in uh, urban planning, it's such a general discipline that you have to sort of pick something specific. But I do think that are connections between each project I do to the next one, and I sort of build on that. Uh, and I guess you could sort of draw a line from um, you know studying about American studies and fine arts to getting involved in planning, and then from getting involved in planning to working on the Embarcadero Center expansion in San Francisco, and then dealing with housing issues. But I have definitely skipped around. Um, but part of it is maybe because I've gotten bored with things and gotten interested in other things. Um, there was a time when I was working with nonprofits in New York City doing supportive housing, and I couldn't understand the zoning code. It was just so complicated. At the time, there were like these six huge 3-inch volumes. And so I volunteered with the Citizens Planning and Housing Council in New York, and we would meet once a month and try to figure out reforms that we could suggest for improving the zoning to allow supportive housing projects. And I met some interesting people there. There's a guy named Mark Ginsberg, who's um, actually speaking at the Passive House Conference that I met back in the day when we were zoning nerds. And um, often it's the things that aren't related to the work that you're being paid for that shape your career more than what goes on in the office. And um, you also become aware of problems that need to be solved. Another thing, my advice my dad gave me, it's funny, I don't really mention him very much, but as you're asking, he said, find a problem and solve it. And I think that has been um, a force, that if I catch up with things and I'm trying to figure out what to do next, I think about, well, what are the problems? Here's an empty building. It's just been sitting there for 20 years. That's a problem that needs to be solved. Or um, I've also looked at slightly smaller problems. I helped orchestrate a green building tax credit when we couldn't make the numbers work for 360 State Street. I also involved with electric vehicles, and that's sort of a side passion. But and all the stuff that you care about, there are always connections. You meet people, you learn more, and that's that's been helpful to me because I become aware of things, that problems that need to be solved, or opportunities, or ways I can add value. I also have not um, thought that much about um, you know how am I going to um, pay the mortgage. It's something that you have to do, and as a architect developer, it can be sort of risky. But I've sort of learned to balance that risk and have things that are sort of safe and other things that are speculative. And over time, hopefully, those things balance each other out.
Absolutely. Some really wise advice, I think, there for emerging professionals. A couple of things that you said, finding a problem and solving it. Also, that a lot of maybe your most valuable experiences come outside of the office in your networking opportunities, in volunteer work, that sort of thing. What have
Mhm.
been some of your most valuable experiences outside of your professional career that you think have influenced maybe your interests, your line of work, and ultimately been impactful on your
Mm.
professional
Yeah.
development?
Well, marrying my wife, who keeps me honest and focused and disciplined, probably the
Good
most
answer.
important.
Is she in the audience?
um, no, seriously, I tend to uh, maybe my instinct is to take a few more risks than I should, and to um, uh, take on more things. And so it's good to have a partner that you can bounce ideas off of. That um, and also she's been a really important uh, designer for the firm with aesthetic issues. So I guess having a partner that is um, uh, helps you in lots of different ways is important. But in terms of volunteer things I've done, uh, working with New York Cares was great. We would go out and help with different projects. The reason I ended up being the chairman of the board of the Harlem School of the Arts is we did a weekend assignment where they needed help clearing out organizing their library, and there were vines growing on the roof of the building that had been maintained, and so we had a crew of 20 people, and I got to know one of the board members, and they needed an architect on the board, and they said, "Hey, Bruce, would you be interested in being on our board? Because there's almost every nonprofit needs someone who understands buildings on their board." So
We can
that,
certainly relate.
yeah, that was helpful because I got involved with a whole network of people in New York City. Um, I guess none of them became clients of mine, but they knew people. And there was a time when I needed to raise money for this project on Roosevelt Island called the Octagon, and it was way beyond what I could do. And they believed in me, and they put in lots of money until we could get a pension fund to close. So they're uh, and again, working with the Citizens Housing and Planning Council was helpful. It just gave me expertise I didn't have and figure out how to navigate that. More recently, probably the highlight of my volunteer experience in my career was I was appointed by President Biden to be on the Commission on Fine Arts, and I was famously fired last October.
I saw on your LinkedIn it said that
Yeah,
you mentioned very explicitly that you were fired by Donald J. Trump.
yeah, and it's really sad because it was such an interesting assignment. I was recommended because of my historic preservation background. The commission didn't have anyone that had preservation experience. We had some really talented architects. Billy Chen was the chair, uh, you know, very influential planners and landscape architects, and it's only a 7-person panel, but there wasn't a preservation anyone who really understood historic preservation. I've done 7 certified historic rehabs and navigated that, and also had experience in figuring out how to add to buildings. I even have the Morgan has a ballroom, so I've got experience with that. But unfortunately, the current administration didn't want my advice on ballrooms, I guess. So I was terminated with everyone else, and who knows what's going to happen there. But that of course, all these volunteer things are unpaid, but that was, in a way, I wouldn't have traded that for anything, because we're sort of like the design review board for DC, both public and private buildings, meeting with the most prominent firms in the country, talking about issues with adding to, like, the Air and Space Museum, to libraries, to schools, to monuments, and that was fascinating. And we'll see what happens with that. I also I'm on the board of the Passive House Network, and that's thrilling. I think I've gotten to a point in my career where it really takes me 4 or more years to do one project that's impactful, which is worth doing. But my impact in sharing things that I've discovered and helping younger people and other firms tackle challenging problems enlarges that impact. So I really am a big believer in Passive House. I do think for younger people, it's more important than LEAD, because it's based on building science, and it just makes sense given the issues that we're facing, both economic issues and environmental issues. It's sort of the perfect solution to finding a way to make buildings that actually don't cost more, but they cost half as much to operate, and they also have half the environmental damage. And of course, I'm obsessed with sequestering carbon, which has also drawn me to adaptive reuse projects. I didn't think of other things I might have missed, but and the Electric Vehicle Club, I've enjoyed being part of that. I've been driving electric cars for 11 years, and I'm just passionate. I mean, I'm an early adopter with technology, only because I found that certain types of technology they're just better, and I enjoy discovering those solutions. And when I find something that seems to be a good idea, sharing ideas with other people. And so I've been working with that. We have a great website that Barry Kresh, took over from my role as president, manages. It's the BuildGreenCT.com, and so that's a policy thing. I have been involved in policy changes. I was when I was working on the Octagon project and was having a hard time getting the project financed. I testified and was able to get FHA rules changed so that you could get a larger mortgage if you were adding energy efficiency equipment, which up until then they wouldn't fund additional money if you spent more on things like solar panels or fuel cells, and they changed that. And again, those are things that when I see a problem, whether it's a problem that I'm much more interested in solving a problem that affects lots of people than just one project I'm facing, because there's a lot of ways to improve the way buildings are built and financed. And so if in your personal experience you encounter a problem that needs to be fixed, why not fix it? Even though someone's not going to pay you to do it. I was able to testify down in DC, and they passed this bill. In fact, they call it the Becker bill because it was sort of a standalone thing that Carolyn Maloney passed by a voice vote that changed the FHA regulations. And since then, apparently thousands of projects have benefited from it. So I like to, if I see a problem and I can fix it, whether, it's actually more exciting for me to fix it if it's a problem that lots of people are addressing. Tomorrow, I'm going to go up and talk and be part of a press conference, because I've sort of learned a lot about hotels since getting involved with this Hotel Marcel. And the crazy thing is the state's no longer investing in promoting tourism. every other state has a big occupancy tax, and they take a part of that to help promote the economy of tourism. And Connecticut has stopped doing that. So I'm going to go up and testify, and that sort of in my self interest, but the whole economy will benefit from that too. So I have a hard time staying in one lane. If I sort of see whether it's something that's specifically about buildings or something larger than that. Sometimes it's satisfying, sometimes it's not. But if it's something I care about, passionate about, I'd like to dive in and see if I can make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, fascinating and very diverse sort of experiences that you've had. Seems like that diversity in your experiences and your interests has been valuable to you over your career and your professional development. I want to go back again to maybe your early career, your education. You mentioned the Master of Business Administration. I'm sorry, you mentioned the undergraduate degree in American Studies and Fine Arts. I know you took an internship, and you mentioned you did some work in San Francisco before you went back to school to get your master's, I believe,
Well, that's it.
around
Yeah,
the same time.
the sequence was I did a year in a planning firm in Boston. Then I did dual degrees at a Master of Architecture and an MBA, and then I went to San Francisco, and then I came back. So I
Gotcha.
hopped around. I guess
What were
one
the
thing I did is I made a big
maybe
investment. I spent 4 years in college and then 4 years in graduate school, and that sort of gave me the ability to sort of grow into my education because I was definitely overeducated by the time I left graduate school.
what were maybe some of the challenges that you experienced going from your Bachelor of Arts to your career in design and development in those early stages, things that maybe you had to overcome or learn before you could really
Yeah,
qualify for the career you wanted?
yeah, it was hard to do. I was in a way you had to always be schizophrenic because at the architecture school, you're using one part of your brain, and at the business school, it's all spreadsheets and numbers, and um, it's not as visual. Um, and so I had to sort of integrate. There wasn't really a joint degree program, so I had to sort of. And I had a bike. I biked back and forth across New Haven, sometimes 4 times a day to do the classes. But then I had to sort of integrate that, and there wasn't like a one path for me to follow. I had to sort of find my way, and maybe that made it more personal and um, more engaging for me. Uh, I've never been good at following rules or just sort of sticking with a program, so maybe that suited my personality. Some people probably would drive them crazy, and they want to have like tell me the 10 things I have to do, and they'll do those. But I'm I've sort of it was challenging, but I sort of enjoyed that. And um, but one thing that was hard was, and I don't actually know too many people who have succeeded at this. I always wanted to be a designer first, and the reason um, I learned the development stuff was I didn't want to be have to spend half my time as an architect marketing, which a lot of architecture firms spend a lot of time marketing, putting together presentation models and presentations and putting in for RFPs. And it'd be interesting to take and break down the typical architect's hours, week by week to see what they're actually doing. Um, I have a theory that I spend less time on the development stuff than some architects do on the marketing stuff. Um, I also I have a really small office. I used to have 20 people, and then that was back like in 2000 and maybe from the year 2000 to 2012. We had like 15 to 20 people, and we had 15 to 20 projects. So we're always having to get the next project to keep um, make sure we had enough money for payroll and stuff. But then over time, I would do fewer projects and have a bigger role in them. And sometimes we'd only have one project in the office. Now I only have 2 people in the office, and it's not as stressful because I don't have to worry about chasing, knowing what the next project is coming from. We can sort of coast along, and um, but it's been, I guess it is always a balance. The challenge is in balancing. I think this is true for any architecture office. How do you make sure you have enough income to pay the staff, um, and do things that you care about, uh, and avoid doing things you really don't want to do, because everyone spends some amount of time doing stuff they don't want to do, right? And so how do you uh, come up with a solution that you look forward to going to work every day? That's sort of the ultimate goal. And for me, it's making it's always thinking about what's going to interest me and make me feel excited to go to work every day. And uh, I do feel really lucky because I've been able to pull these different interests together. I mean, um, the Hotel Marcel was it was a project that was either going to work or it's going to destroy me. It was a very risky project, and all kinds of things happened over the course of it. The pandemic came after we bought the building. We had supply chain issues. I had, you know, sort of a miracle that it came out, but it was only because it was like 80 hours a week, just keeping everything going to finish. But now it's exciting that we were able to meet our goals of, being the first passive house hotel in the United States and LEED Platinum certified, and um, seems to be a viable business too. And then to have the Passive House Network conference there is it's sort of the culmination of all of this because as a board member, to have it come home to that project was almost designed for conferences like this. And I'd also encourage, if everyone's on this call is planning to come, but I think it's going to be a great conference and having it right here in our backyard. I mean, last time they had this, it was in Denver, and it was much harder to get to. And here, it's right here in New Haven. So I think there's a great lineup of speakers. So I always like learning. I mean, now I've been spending some time with the planning group on that conference, trying to figure out who we can bring in to speak. I know one of the things I've been mentioning is we've got to get the Connecticut Passive House group more involved in the planning because there's a lot of great expertise here. It happens to be the PHI group, not the FIAS group. And I know uh, half the projects in Connecticut are FIAS oriented. For those who don't understand, there's sort of two. The Passive House Network is a arm of the Passive House International Organization, and then FIAS is sort of a newer group that is just focused on U.S. standards. In a way, they're competitive, even though they're follow the same principles. But um, and yeah, I think there's still plenty of opportunity for the Connecticut chapter to be front and center in this. I know you guys have been helping to promote it, but there's a need for moderators for some of the sessions, and by all means, want to make this something that's relevant both for the national as well as the local chapter. I know I've gone off on a tangent on that, but my advice to young architects too is um, passive house is the future. I think it's now if you're going to build an apartment building in Massachusetts, it has to be passive house, meet the passive house standards. I'm hoping that in Connecticut that we see the light. I was actually talking to some policy folks about that. Uh, it's just going to be better for everyone in the state if we can build this way. Not just the people who own the buildings, but for ratepayers and for the economy. It's just such a smart thing to do.
And certainly the people that live in the buildings. Someone who works in a passive house these days, I can tell you it's as good as it's advertised to be.
Ah,
We
which one are you? Which passive house building do you spend time in?
Oh, well, you got to come down and see 475's new headquarters in Brooklyn. We renovated a masonry structure in Cobble Hill, and we're operating out of there now. So we
Oh,
actually certified the PHI and PS. we're proud to say.
That's
So
great. So
we'd love to
you
have
got a
you
nice
sometime.
quiet. You got the. I want to make hats that say "Make air quality great again" because
Maca,
anyhow.
love it. So we are a little short on time now. I do want to just open it up to our audience, see if anyone who has joined us today has any questions for Bruce.
I'll jump in. Hey, Bruce, by the way, Connecticut Passive House, we are talking with Ken Levinson about how to be involved
Good.
with the Passive House Network Conference in June. So what is it like for you to be both the client and the architect?
It just adds more. That's a good question, Sarah, because I mean, I have projects where I'm just the architect. It's actually a little frustrating for me. I have,
I bet it's a lot easier to talk yourself into doing the
no,
right thing.
we're just to be honest, I'm there's another phase of work we're doing for the Carey Institute where we did this really beautiful redo of their whole facility. Now they have this really cool brick 19th century house that has been unused for like 40 years. It's crumbling that we're going to turn into staff housing. And I've been telling them, you got to do the asbestos survey because otherwise the numbers, we don't know whether the pricing is going to be accurate. And uh, if it was a project I was developing, I just pick up the phone and hire the environmental consultant, and we know that. But now, when you are making a building, half the stuff has to be done by your client. And if your client is, and the normal relationship is the architect takes direction from the client, not the other way around. But I've sort of gotten spoiled that when you do have the ability to be able to sort of control all the dimensions, and decide, is this going to be a passive house certified building or just follow passive house principles, or are we going to make it 100% fossil fuel free? These are things that when you're your own client, you can just do those things. And if you if you have enough experience, I did spend about a decade working with other developers and learning from them. I guess it could be a little risky to just dive in. The most important skill is to know when you don't know something, and so that's why I'm always trying to figure that out. For this hotel, I took a 6-course certificate program at the Cornell Hotel School because I didn't know anything about hotels and what an operating budget looked like, or whatever. But so, what it's like is it can be immensely satisfying, but it's because you have more control and you can shape things based on your values more. But it is, it's a bigger job. You do there's some things you don't have to do, like you don't have to worry about making presentations to a client and trying to steer them in a certain direction. You just have to take that same energy and internalize it and have confidence in the direction you're going in. I also think that it's nice to own some of what you make. As in a way, my career has evolved from working for a paycheck to working by the hour to working for a certain fee, and then when you're done with the project, you're on to something else, and the only thing that you have from it other than the experience, which might be the most valuable thing, is you saw that you could pay your rent. But when you are creating a building, and you can hold on to part of it, the value of it, in a way, that's more meaningful compensation. And I partnered early on with both the Octagon project on Roosevelt Island in New York and 360 State Street. The main owner was a big pension fund, but I had a little piece of the project that was dependent on how well the project did. And it was nice to having sort of a little kicker there that if it worked out well, I'd participate. It turns out 360 State Street, it didn't work out well because the taxes ended up being 3 times what anyone thought they would be. So but for the Octagon, it that project was sold, and it helped me pay off the balance of my mortgage on my house. So that those are there is economic reward, but there's risks and with everything. But I guess I'm a bit of a risk taker. I think the thing that's more satisfying for me is just being able to know that I'm working on something that I can be proud of, that it's, the environmental aspects of it are consistent with my values. I would have a hard time being hired by someone that wanted to build a building that used fossil fuels now, because I've been driving electric cars for 13 years now. I can't, like the street I live on in Westport, it floods with a foot of water on a full moon, and I just see this coming. And I know that architects are responsible for 40% of the climate damage that we're enduring here. And I think most of, certainly the folks on this call probably, but the whole profession realizes that we have to find ways to make buildings that don't have carbon emissions and to operate them in ways that don't burn fossil fuels. So it's hard to find a client that might be as passionate about that. So if you can do it for your own house. I guess 475 has done it for its own office building, which is great. But that's maybe the biggest value for me, is that the same way that an architect designing a house for their parents can shape it in a way that reflects their values. When you do larger buildings and you have that control, it can help you align your how you spend your time with your values. Yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer.
I think that's a great answer.
Yeah,
It's
it
certainly
is.
a
Thank you.
powerful message there to end on. I think we are out of time here. Don't want to keep you too long, but thanks again so much, Bruce, for joining us this afternoon. This is really awesome, and I think there are some really valuable lessons to be learned for our emerging professionals. This is definitely a video that I'll share with them. Anything else before we sign off, guys?
No, just come to the conference June 4th and 5th at Hotel Marcel, and hopefully it'll be a fun time to get together and an opportunity to share time with people that share our interests.
Absolutely. I'm certainly looking forward to it myself.
All right. Take care.
I'd like to make a quick request. If anyone's willing to turn their camera on, I'd love to get a screenshot of all of our smiling faces.
Oh, okay.
There we are.
All right, everybody.
You got us?
Oh, one more.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Karen and Rolly. All right, ready. 1, 2, 3. One more. All right, thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks again, Bruce.
Thanks a lot, Bruce and Jeremy.